be like to have a career within communications? Now, the first order of business is to break down what that means, because to be honest, communications is this wide and varied field. You could be considering, print journalism, digital media services, or even television broadcast. And under those umbrellas, you also have wide and varied roles and responsibilities. Interviewing others, leading conferences, moderating panels, doing media trainings. Again, a lot to choose from. Well, fortunately for you, I have this wonderful guest lined up today. Her name is Charlotte Kahn, and she's here to break down all of that for us. But what's so compelling about her and her backstory is she's been doing all of this at the highest level. She's worked for major institutions like Standard & Poor's, Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg TV, as well as several others. She's also moderated and held stage with the likes of Al Gore, CEOs of companies like Moderna, JCDecaux, as well as interviewed ambassadors, ministers, politicians, you name it. And again, she's going to break down what's gone into her success, and what it takes to succeed within the field of communications. Now, as always, I do encourage you to check out the full-length audio version, and you can do so wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, heck, right here on YouTube. But I have been chatting a little bit. I think it's about time here to get into today's episode. So why don't we? All right, well, first up, I'd like to dive into the weeds here. And I have this clip coming from the podcast segment, A Day in the Life. And here Charlotte's breaking down what it takes, what's involved in leading up to a conference in which she is moderating a high-level discussion with experts. What's really compelling about it to me is the strategy behind it all. The strategy for not only ensuring that she has effective communication strategies set and in place, but also for the panel experts. Of course, you're there to help them sound good and perform. So anyway, check it out. I think this is a clip you're gonna want to take some notes on. You have this wide range of things that you're involved in, from moderation to these interviews with French ministers to, politicians to high-ranking CEOs, listed companies, unlisted companies, a lot of different types of individuals. So I'd be curious here about what it's like leading up to one of these events. For example, for somebody who doesn't know, obviously there's going to be a lot of preparation that goes into this, but maybe you could shed a little bit more, a little bit more light on all of this and what you go through when you are, prepping for something like that.
Okay, so I think the approach is different whether you work for traditional media when you're doing this, or you're working for an organization, an institution, a corporate, let's say, or a conference, because the objectives are different.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about what I do within the context of doing it for a conference sponsored by an institution or a corporate. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
I will tell you why it's different afterwards. First of all, with the organizers, you need to define their expectations and objectives. Why did they invite this person? Why did they organize this panel? What is it for? I think it's important to get the big picture to start with. What is it all about? I give you an example, for instance, of a conference where I intervened lately. Let's say I traveled to Saudi Arabia, and it was a conference on global labor markets. There was a panel with specialists of AI and how AI is going to change the world of work, which is very topical these days. Yeah. So first I talked to the organizers. Why did you want to talk about it? Why is it important? So it's important for the world generally, but it's important for Saudi Arabia as well, because all the content will help them feed their own reflection on how they should steer their strategy in the right direction to provide a job market that will cater for the need to use AI more often in our daily lives. So first you talk to the organizers, you try to understand what they're trying to achieve, what their vision is, okay? Then when you have to moderate a panel with experts, I always try to talk to each participant individually, and I ask them, in light of the theme, because you don't start from nowhere. You normally have a theme for a discussion. And if you're very lucky, the organizers will give you a few bullet points in terms of the different aspects they want you to touch upon, and you will discuss them with the participants. I always ask them, what do you want people to remember after you have spoken?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that often we don't approach it the right way, and I ask people, engage them to think about, what people should remember. It's the best way ever, and that's valuable for people out there as well. Think about what people should remember.
What the message is,
And
essentially, right? What their message is, right? What they're trying to get
yeah,
across, what they're trying to have, resonate with people, intellectually
totally.
speaking or emotionally speaking, perhaps.
Absolutely. But I think it's very important because I often also ask them how people should feel. And that's another aspect of communication that people often neglect. And another thing that people should understand is that people will remember emotions more than they will remember facts and data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why for me it's important to create a positive, uplifting communication experience.
Mm,
There's no point sharing lots of data and facts about an important topic if people leave feeling depleted
right.
or depressed or confused. No, that's
Yeah.
pointless. You
Yeah.
have failed in that sense. Okay. So then I talk to the participants. I do ask them what their key messages are, starting the other way around, like I mentioned. And then based on what they've all said, I will try to create a narrative because it's got to flow. So I will
Mm,
almost treat the panel like a story
yeah.
or
Yeah.
like an article. Okay, that's how I do it. And in fact, I'm often, and that's the journalist's way, I guess. I'm often thinking in terms of I'm thinking in headlines, header,
Yeah.
text, the big
Yeah.
information. I mean, how would you tell that story? So that's what I'm trying to do. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't have much time to prepare. So I always advise people, and it doesn't matter because it's not about you as a person, as a journalist, okay? It's about, like I've said, it's about what your clients want. It's about the audience, the public, the participants, etc. But they they have to have that visibility, that comfort, that you know what you're doing. But if you don't have the time to do that, like I've said, keep it general. Ask the big questions to give them as much space as they need to deliver that message. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I mean, it sounds to me like you're almost like reverse engineering it all in a way. Like you have your objectives and you're trying to understand the context again of what the organizers are getting after, what they want. And then also to like what these individuals want to get across. What is their key messaging? How do they want people to feel? And you being that moderator or person who's bringing it all together. And I like that metaphor of it being a story or being a headline, a heading, and like, yeah, I think that's really helpful.
I think that's very helpful because it really then helps you create all sorts of follow-ups or questions where people have the chance to deliver something powerful, like a powerful soundbite, etc. If you think that way. But I just wanted to go back to what you have just said. This reverse engineering, I find it really interesting, and I think that's quite the appropriate term indeed. It's important to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
It looks unprepared, but it's always very prepared, isn't
Yeah,
it? But you also need
absolutely.
you must also leave enough room for the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Interaction with the audience. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's happened to me to basically, literally, I mean, break panels to go, I can see you smiling over there. I mean, obviously that's making you react. You want to share something with us.
Mm,
That really adds generally to like I've said, to the experience and to the panel, because it's not about, there is not this invisible, well, there is a sort of invisible curtain between you and the audience, but it should not be
yeah.
like that. It's not about talking at people, but to people. Otherwise, what's the
Right.
point? It's a dialogue. It's not
Yeah.
a presentation or a lecture. It's not a
Yeah.
passive process.
Yeah. It's for the audience, right? At the end of the day, I mean, that's like obviously physically the people that are there, but then also like more broadly speaking, what that message is going to filter out beyond the walls of that room when it's taking place, right? Like that's what you want it to, that's the goal. I would say that's the objective. So keeping that first and foremost, planted within your mind would have to be, a central sort of theme to all of this, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the point you've made is this reverse engineering. I mean, that I would call it being on message.
Okay.
Okay, really understanding what the organizer's objective, what the objectives are, let's say, and sticking to that, and always, going back to it. I think
Yeah.
that's very, very important, because it gives structure to the overall um, panel or communication opportunity.
All right. Well, on the heels of that last clip there, I do want to continue things on further with this notion of effective communication. I mean, heck, if you're interested in this field, you probably want to have some skills going into it all, things that you can start working on or developing right now. So I did ask Charlotte to share some effective communication strategies and tips. So here's a clip of that. Do you have like your core beliefs or teachings that you go about with every single person that you're working with? Like, this is central to, being a good communicator. This is something you cannot forget. You have to try to do this each and every time. Do you have any sort of like core messaging that you're relaying or teaching to some of your clients?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I advise people not to take questions or things too personally.
Mm,
If the interviewer becomes a little bit pressing or aggressive, no one's putting a gun to your head. You don't have to reply straight away. Take a deep breath, take your time, and think. And going back to the point you've made, the technique you've just mentioned, there's a name for it. It's called pivoting.
yeah.
Okay, pivoting back to your message. Always remember, when you communicate, you are on a mission. Okay, and your mission is to share your message. Your mission is to make sure that when the people exit the room, they will remember a few key points
Yeah.
about what you need to share. Okay, so that's something you need to bear in mind all the time. This is not just a random, moment to talk about various things. No, you are on a mission. And it's actually very helpful as well to get rid of nerves when you realize that you have a job to do, it's not about you. So
That's a good
forget about
point.
your flutterings, forget about your forgetfulness, forget about all you need to do is to deliver your message. Okay. So yes, when someone is asking you a question, eyes on the ball, what do I need to say? What's important? What do I need to go back to in terms of my messaging? So it's very and you don't have to repeat the same thing all the time, but also another important aspect of communication is repetition. Repeat, repeat, repeat. People need
Mm,
to hear something at least 3 times to, vaguely remember it. So that's a very important point. Don't use the same words every time, but when it comes to messaging, say the same thing using different words, many times, and then eventually people will retain something. That's a very important point. So going back to the basics, actually, we've talked about preparation. We've talked about, messaging. First of all, you need to be very, you need to understand what your message is. Of course, there's no impactful,
mhm.
effective communication without that. Okay, so your messaging, what is it? You need to be very, very clear about it. Then how you communicate it, of course, by constantly pivoting back to it. And often a question, and I think it may have been, was it Kissinger or was it Reagan actually, who had this very, very famous quote? He said, or he would say after press interviews, do you have any questions for my answers?
This was Kissinger, because this was a story that was
Okay.
related to me. Was
Yeah.
this? It was about that. Yeah, it was Kissinger.
And it's such a brilliant quote. I will always share with people when I give media training. It's not
Yeah.
about the questions. You
Yeah.
can ignore them. You have to be subtle about it. There's an art to
Hmm.
it. And the
Hmm.
art is to acknowledge the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand why you're asking that.
Yeah.
And then bridge to something else. So pivot back to your messaging.
Hmm.
But I'm here to tell you that this and that, okay? And then so that's called pivoting, and it's super important. And you see politicians doing it all the time because,
All the
of course,
time.
they're
Yeah.
always trying to, veer away from the difficult questions. Another advice I would say is to keep it short and simple. Don't
Hmm.
just go on about things you don't need to. Make your
Yeah.
point, say what you have to say, shoot and leave, right? What else could I share in terms of good tips for effective communication? Yeah, think of a few powerful quotes that you could share in advance of the interview, for instance.
Mm, yeah.
And that's it. I could go on about it all day.
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, I think those are helpful. Those are,
It's
a
very,
few right there. Yeah.
media training, empowering people to be better communicators is so rewarding. I love doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see why. I mean, like you would be able to see the results, right? Like pretty quickly, like when people are adopting some of these values or strategies and approaches. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I could see the value in all of that. And how you as a professional could be deriving a sense of fulfillment from all of that. Now, something else I wanted to investigate a little bit further in relation to Charlotte and her career is what she feels went into her success. Like, how did she succeed within the field of communications? And for that matter, life and careers and all that stuff. And I just found this next clip to be really, really insightful and one that I think a lot of the listeners can gain inspiration from. So check it out.
I'm a lower middle class kid. Okay. And same, I used to have some, what's the best way to describe it? I used to be slightly ashamed of it, to be
Mm,
honest. I
mm,
didn't have the family culture, support, and guidance that so many of my subsequent, friends and colleagues had. But there
yeah.
again, and like I've said, my parents were not particularly helpful, unfortunately, in terms of finding my calling. But there was a great degree of freedom, and that freedom let me. I mean, I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do, and that was very empowering too. So
Yeah.
all these things, being the latchkey kid, growing up in a small village in Brittany, having no connections whatsoever, no clue about how you're supposed to behave, hold yourself, no one's telling you what to say, what not to say, whatever. All that freedom gave me so much power because I was able, first of all, it made me extremely resilient. I've always
Yeah.
been extremely independent. I mean, I've never literally counted on anyone in life for my professional development anyway, and for most things, let's face it. So it's
Mm,
made me very resilient. It's made me possibly more authentic because when
mm,
no one's telling you how to be, or when there are no expectations, you can just be yourself. I
yeah.
think people find it refreshing. I certainly have a very different view on life, and even when I'm having those conversations, I know that, not to say that I'm contrarian, but I know that will bring in a different perspective. And normally it's the big picture. Why are we doing this? What's the point? When the
Yeah.
problem with people who've been very institutionalized, they don't realize that what they're doing is always following the same pattern.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my message for the people listening to us right now is to realize that your insecurities about who you are should be embraced. They make you you. You are unique. Everyone is. There's no one else like you. So
Yeah.
there's something about you that is special, that is different. There's something wonderful about you, and you need to embrace that
Yeah.
and be out there and go for it. And don't care what people who cares what people think, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter. You can't spend your entire life expecting validation from other people. Although, I mean, I'm a presenter, I very much understand that I have a need for validation, for being seen. It's probably because I didn't get much of that when I grew up. It took me a
Mm,
while to get that.
yeah. Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it. And I want to share it. I want to tell people that, you can follow your dream because I've mentioned loving my career earlier, but Christopher, really, I mean, I live the life of my dreams.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sentiment right there. And it really comes down to this reframe. And I think, like, again, in speaking with so many different types of people on this program, this is a common theme that comes up. People that are achieving success, that are finding it, have this almost superpower. I wouldn't say that they're born with it, but maybe through experience or through life experiences along the way, they've learned, and it sounds like for you too, learned how to reframe situations or experiences that could have been interpreted as quite negative or things that would have really derailed you. And I think that's what does happen, unfortunately, to some people is they go through some very adverse situations or experience some things that are tough to get through, and they let that in a way beat them, right? But it sounds like to me that the way you've kind of looked at it all, it's like, no, this is empowering to me. This gives me a different angle to pursue things. This gives me a different perspective. that is valuable, that is wanted. And I think that fine line right there can really spell the difference between, ultimate career success or even, life success for that matter. Like careers and lives are certainly intertwined. So yeah, I really like that. I like that point there. Now, finally, I do want to squeeze in one last clip here. This is a careers-based podcast, and I do come across a lot of people that are jazzed up about what they do. And Charlotte certainly fits that bill. She is passionate about her work, and I just want to give her that opportunity to share that feeling and how important it is to find a career that does drive you. So listen in.
My job, what I do, like I've said, it's not a job anymore. It's a lifestyle. My occupation, let's call it, has been one of the greatest source of joy and pleasure in my life. It has been a journey. It's not always been the case. But it's important to have, we talked about the vision earlier, maybe not that vision, maybe not that fire, but to have that desire, that energy to keep going until you find that very spot.
All right, well, I think it's about time to draw this video to a close, but as always, I do encourage you to check out the full-length audio version. There we dive into several other topics. You're going to hear more about Charlotte's really inspiring story about how she got into the field of communications, and along the way, you're going to learn more tips, more insights, things that you can take on for yourself to position you for success within that whole professional field. Outside of that, you're going to get looks at where that field and where that industry is going, how technology is influencing it, and several other things. So again, you can find the audio version wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... And while I do have you here, I would love a like or subscribe. It's the best way to let this YouTube algorithm know that the content matters and should be put in front of more people. Anyway, I will have another profession covered coming at you right next week, so don't miss it. All right, we'll see you then.